going to say that as somebody who has been doing talk radio for about 21 years and TV for about 11, I have a pretty good bead on these political things, the nomenclature. I have no idea what Bidenomics is. I know what Reaganomics is, the same thing as JFKonomics. That is, cut taxes, free up capital, grow the economy, create jobs. Here's CNN saying that Biden's facing some headwinds on this so-called Bidenomics push.
The White House trying out some new messaging in its effort to tout the president's handling of the economy. Bidenomics is what they're calling it. Biden will be in Chicago tomorrow. He's expected to speak on this, and we're told underscore recent job gains and low unemployment. But the president is facing some serious headwinds. Not only do polls suggest voters are skeptical of him on the economy, but there's also the nagging threat of a potential recession.
My first guest is the political economy and senior research faculty at the American Institute for Economic Research, Samuel Gregg. Thank you for joining us.
Andrew, thanks for having me on.
What is Bidenomics?
Well, I wish I could tell you it was something new, but basically it's not. Bidenomics is the conviction which I think has been something that President Biden has believed in all his life, which is that the government must play a considerably big role in the economy. And that's cashed out in several ways. One is what we call industrial policy. He wants to use the government to try and deliver better outcomes, or what he thinks are better outcomes in particular segments of the economy than would otherwise be delivered by markets. So that's the big one. The second thing is that he's absolutely convinced that the American economy is full of what's called market failures. And he believes that the government must act to address what he regards as market failures. A third thing is that he wants to basically shift the focus of the economy away from meeting consumer demands and wants, and much more upon meeting the demands of those who produce the wealth, particularly in areas like manufacturing. Now, of course, anyone who knows anything about economics knows that this is pretty much contrary to the basic insights that market economics brings to this discussion, as well as the way that markets work. It puts an enormous degree of faith in the capacity of government, legislators, officials, civil servants, technocrats, to basically know better than the market, which of course is made up of 300 million American consumers, what the market can actually deliver. It also ends up producing a great number of inefficiencies in the market because whether we like it or not, governments can't outguess 330 million Americans.
But sir, that's the point though, right? The technocrat has assured him or herself that they know best. And many of these people, if it were not for a government job directing these things, most likely nobody would hire them in the private sector to direct much of anything.
Well, I think you're pointing to the fact that industrial policy, which is really what Bidenomics is about, of course, relies upon quote unquote experts, technocrats, bureaucrats, people with jobs in Washington, D.C., to basically outguess hundreds of millions of choices that are made by American consumers and businesses every day. So basically, there's a fair degree of what the Greeks would call hubris undermining this, right? It basically assumes that somehow government officials can know all the information that they would need if they were truly to outguess the workings of markets. And that's why we call it hubris, because it involves false expectations about what human beings can know in the present and in the future. So that means that they can't help but make mistakes. And that is where I think Bidenomics is going to end up taking us.
You know, if we invoke Adam Smith all the way through F.A. Hayek and all of the great, works that we were all influenced by, none of them really account for what we now call woke. I don't think Henry Hazlitt wrote anything about, the government making investments in companies, not because they produce the best semiconductor, but because their board of directors has the proper demographic makeup, or their C-suite has their proper demographic makeup. If you have one semiconductor producer that's producing a more efficient product and the competitor has a transgender CFO, and the government says, well, we've got to give them a grant because they've got a transgender CFO, we're basically saying we don't care about efficiency or quality. We care more about wokeness. I mean, I can't think of anything in the great works that ever addressed that.
Yes, and in fact, the Biden administration has made it very clear that it is prioritizing things like DEI, ESG, which in many respects reflects what we call woke capitalism. They have made it very clear that when it comes to government contracts, when it comes to the design of industrial policy, that things like ESG, DEI, which I think is very clearly influenced by, let's call it woke ideology, are going to take priority when it comes to making decisions about who gets government contracts and who doesn't. They're not hiding this. This is the extraordinary thing about it. They're not hiding this. And in fact, I remember very well that back, I think it was in 2020 or 2019, then candidate Joseph Biden actually said, I want to see an end of shareholder capitalism, whereby the purpose of markets is to deliver shareholder value. In this new Bidenomics framework, the emphasis is upon the types of social causes that you're identifying. And that's a serious problem because guess what? Social causes, promoting particular social causes, is not going to lead to better optimal economic outcomes. And you don't have to be a liberal or conservative to say that. That's just basic economics.
Well, their basic point is it doesn't matter if it works. It's that we did the right thing, right? If you're producing a car, it should be a car that performs well. If you're producing a cell phone, it should be a cell phone that performs well. If you're producing semiconductors, it should be semiconductors that perform well. These other non-efficiency-based considerations are part of the problem, and I guess that's privileged thinking when you've never really worked a day of your life in the private sector. If you go straight from the university into government, you think you've figured it all out.